千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Laozi. As ever, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I want to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Without further ado, let's get right back into chapter 73 of the Daodejing. And I hope everyone remembers from last time that the chapter title, translated from the original Chinese, is the Heavenly Net chapter, 天网. So this heavenly net, as we will see in this chapter and discussed last time, is a term describing the Tao. Just like the Tao being everywhere, covering everything, the heavenly net is like an infinitely vast net. And despite that vastness, it does not have gaps where things can slip through. Absolutely nothing. And no one can be outside of the heavenly net. So let's talk about the details. Here's the chapter 73 chapter, not a very long chapter, 12 lines in all. Here's the translation with the English on the left-hand side, the Chinese on the left-hand side, and the English on the right-hand side. We did our sectional analysis last time, dividing this up into multiple sections. Here's the result of that analysis. There's a thicker line between 5 and 6, as you can see there. It's dividing up chapter 73 into two halves. The first half is talking about this concept, this comparison of being bold in daring and being bold but not daring. So that's the first 2 lines there. And then 3 lines below that talk about the difference between the two, and then talk about the Tao, ties that in with the Tao. So this is very intentional on the part of Laozi. He wanted to illustrate that things have consequences. There's cause and effect. The bold and daring causes the consequence of being killed. The bold and not daring causes the consequence of survival. And we'll talk about exactly why. Now, last time we got to line 5. So we definitely covered the comparison between the two and also the implication from line 3 to line 5 about the disposition of the Tao toward the two. And then why there's a concept called the Tao of Heaven followed by the heavenly net. These are all tied together. So let's do a quick recap of what we have covered so far. First, the complementary duality, the yin and yang of the two. The bold and daring will be killed. The bold and not daring will survive. So when we actually look deeper into the meaning of these 2 lines, we see that boldness can be done in different ways. So daring and not daring, both can originate from courage, but lead to different results. And we have seen that historically, the brave and foolish die, while the brave who proceed intelligently, survive, are rewarded in life. They get good results. So this has always been the case since the beginning of humanity. This is part of the pattern, the Tao of humanity. And I summarize all that in a table that we looked at last time, where at the very top is the idea of boldness, bravery, courage. And that's further divided into two columns, where on the left we have the rashness, the recklessness of just daring without thinking. And then on the right-hand side, we have 不敢, not daring, biding time, which is an important concept in the Tao as well. So the results is what you can see in the table. Now, most people interpreting this chapter of the Daodejing will only stick to the topmost row that you see there. That is the implication of daring but being reckless, or being intelligent on the ancient battlefield. So charging forward blindly can lead you right into a deadly trap and therefore be killed. And then if instead you observe and then attack the weakest link, you're doing so intelligently, you still possess courage, but you get much better results. Alternatively, it is also having the wisdom to retreat when conditions are not favorable, so that you want to pick and choose the right time and place to mount your counterattack. So a lot of times in the West we say discretion is the better part of valor. And this is referring to that same wisdom. Then what we want to do is that we want to apply that to ourselves, living the modern life. That's the middle row there. So to be bold but reckless is being proactive in taking action, regardless of what it is that you do in life. It's a good idea to be proactive, but not a good idea to be reckless about it. Not a good idea to proceed without a plan. That usually gets you suboptimal or negative results. On the other hand, if you take the same proactive initiative, but you combine it with a thoughtful plan, a plan that you thought all the way through, that you are taking the time to figure out when is the right time to do what you need to do, then you tend to end up with much better results. So in life, this is very common. We see both yin and yang, the complementary duality. So for instance, you can very oftentimes see people getting all pumped up, full of excitement, but don't really have a well-defined plan, don't really have a clear idea about what is the next step to take. So we have seen them get less than desirable results, or not the very best results. And we have also seen people who thought about what they wanted to accomplish. They thought about exactly what they need to do step by step. They even thought about contingencies if obstacles were encountered. So those are the people who are much more likely to succeed. And the last row there is of special importance to all of us because it applies to spiritual seekers. So you can apply this entire idea internally to cultivation of the Tao. It all starts the same, that there's a motivation to better oneself. And you can do so with a good plan, which will be on the right-hand side, or without, but resorting to just whatever comes your way in a random way without a whole lot of thinking. That usually doesn't get you very far because there are so many offerings out there in the material world, each one seemingly tempting, each one promising instant results, quick results, instant gratification. Whereas what you really need is really something that's more proven, something that's time tested. And I would say that the Tao, having a history of thousands of years, is the time-tested way to better oneself. So I would definitely tie the Tao to the lower right-hand corner there so that we can all carefully choose a path based on what you wish to accomplish in your life. What is your goal? What is your purpose? What is the meaning of life for you? What is your mission in this lifetime? Choose that path and start walking. So that is the distinction between the two. We can have that apply even with internal cultivation. So the bold enduring will be killed. In terms of internal cultivation, it just means that you end up with poor results. You waste a lot of time. The bold in not daring will survive. In the case of internal cultivation, it just means that we can make progress with spiritual refinement. So that is where we what we talked about in regards to boldness, leading to two different ways, two different paths. We also talked about lines 3 to 5, and this is important too. Basically, Lao Tzu, this is the humorous approach from Lao Tzu, saying that, well, it almost looks like heaven is overwhelmingly favorable to the thoughtful and is disliking. It seems that heaven dislikes those who are reckless because it kills them by the thousands, by the millions. So the sages all know that the Tao does not possess human emotions. So why is it that it seems to favor one side and not the other? It seems to have a bias. It seems to inflict horrible punishment on those who rush ahead without thinking. It seems to reward those who are careful and plan things out and patient. So that preference seems to be at odds with the Tao not having emotions. And this is why Lao Tzu says even the sages have a difficult time explaining this. Now, of course, you and I know that this is not really that puzzling to the sages. This is being said in a jocular way. Basically, we all know, and the sages know, that there's cause and effect. It isn't heaven that is doing it to us. It's us, we ourselves. We do it to us. We get our great results by following the Tao. We get bad results when we move contrary to the Tao. And this is why last time I highlighted this very ancient idea that the Tao, this universal rule, this principle overriding everything, whatever that is, it's not human, it's not a deity, it has no emotions. In the very beginning of Jing, it'll say, as you see here in this slide, that the great Tao has no emotions. It moves the sun and the moon. That's just a poetic way to say that the Tao is responsible for everything, but it does so. It acts on everything without emotional attachments. So this concept originated thousands of years ago, and it hasn't changed. By the time of Lao Tzu, 2,500 years ago, and it hasn't changed from his time, 2,500 years ago, to today. And anyone who wishes to learn more about that can always take a look at the Tao of Tranquility. That is out now as paperback, as audiobook, and widely available, easily obtained from outlets like Amazon. So this is the point we ended up last time. What I want to do is to continue on exploring this. And the most important thing for me to do today is to tie this together with the metaphysical concept of the heavenly net, what we call karma nowadays. And then I also want to, extremely important here, to talk about how the sages arrived at all these different conclusions about you, about me, about multiple lifetimes. So by gaining insights into the way they thought, you're going to see that it makes a lot of sense. So let's get right into it, starting with line 6. So line 6 talks about the Tao of Heaven. So let me be clear about this term. 天之道, the Tao of Heaven, the heavenly Tao, and Tao itself. These are synonymous. We can use them oftentimes interchangeably. Now, the heavenly Tao, or the Tao of Heaven, is what the sages thought of as being applicable everywhere. That is, it applies to the heaven, the movements of heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever it is that is governing their motion, that is the Tao. Today, with science, with astronomy, we know these are orbital mechanics. And then the Tao also applies to the earth itself. That is, as an example, the seasons on earth, the seasons in this world follow the heavenly cycles. Today, with the benefits of science, we know about the axial tilt of the earth and the revolution around the sun, producing different weathers. But this is all back to the original concept that there's some overriding principle that governs it all. And the ancients call that the Tao. And today, we can say that whether it's physics or astronomy, orbital mechanics, we can all group that as part of the overall principles that is in effect in our universe. Now, what about us? What about human beings? Human beings follow the changing seasons. The changing seasons govern to a great extent what we do. Even now, in the modern world, what we do is that when the temperature changes, when it goes higher, we wear less. When the weather is cold, the temperature plummets, we put on more clothing. It's definitely having a direct impact, well, what we do with ourselves. Now think about the ancient agrarian societies, where it's very important, of the utmost importance, to follow the seasons, so that there's a time to plant crops, there's a time for harvesting, and there is a time to get through the winter and wait for the arrival of spring. Extremely important. So here in this slide, you're looking at the Eastern paradigm, where from thousands of years ago, the sages thought of this one thing, this unified principle, the Tao, that applied everywhere. It applied in heaven and earth and human beings, just absolutely everywhere. Now, I want to share with you that the ancients did not all think this way. And let me bring up Western paradigm. Much of our Western civilization today derives from the ancient Greek philosophies, ancient Greek culture. Once upon a time, the ancient Greek philosophy looked at this whole thing, existence, and they thought about it in a different way. They thought about how heaven would be different than earth. So instead of what we are looking at here, the Eastern paradigm, where one unified principle governs all, the ancient Greek thought about them as being distinctly different. Why? How? Well, you see, the ancient Greek looked to the heavens and thought about the heavenly realm, the celestial. That was a realm of perfection. It must be, because heaven is in that direction. Heaven is all about perfection. So they thought about, for instance, the movements of the sun, the moon, planets, stars. It must be like a perfect circle. And they looked around at the earth and they saw the earth as being completely different. That this realm, the realm of the earth, was the realm of imperfection, whereas heaven was the realm of perfection. And this was because they could look and see humans squabbling with one another. They look in nature, they see death everywhere. So the realm of earth is the realm of dirt. Therefore, for the ancient Greek, Heaven and earth was like more like the yin and yang complementary duality, where they were not the same, whereas the ancient Chinese thought of the heaven and earth as being ultimately unified in the Tao. Now, later on, though, in ancient Western civilization, the thinking changed to be much more aligned with Eastern philosophy, although they did not know it at the time. What happened was Galileo, the scientist, the astronomer. So he came around, he looked at this whole philosophy of the celestial realm being different from the earthly realm. And he proposed a thought experiment. Galileo said, imagine that I have this rock. The rock is definitely of the earthly realm, imperfect, the realm of dirt. Now imagine that we are strong enough to throw this rock high up toward heaven. We already know that if you throw it up, it comes back down to earth, but a stronger person can throw it up higher, and then it will get closer to heaven before falling back down to the earth, back to the dirt. If someone is strong enough and throw it up, it's going to just become part of heaven. Then you have a piece of the earthly realm being in the perfect realm of heaven. That would be contradictory to the division of the ancient philosophies. So in fact, Galileo said, if you think through this thought experiment, you will see that heaven and earth are not so different after all. Whatever governs heaven must also govern here, and vice versa. So that unified thinking of Galileo is very similar to what the ancient Chinese sages thought thousands of years ago. Let's explore a little bit further into that ancient philosophy and the reasoning steps of how they arrived at this conclusion. To do that, we can actually look back to a previous chapter to explore the Tao of Heaven. So the Tao of Heaven appears in chapter 73, but previously in chapter 25, there's a description on how the entire scheme is tied together. In chapter 25 of the Daodejing, it says, humans follow the laws of earth. Earth follows the laws of heaven. Heaven follows the laws of Tao. Tao follows the laws of nature. So here, when we talk about the laws, we're talking about what in science would be called the natural laws of physics, of biology, chemistry, etc. So let's illustrate this with some graphics and further explanation. We begin with all of us, human beings. Humans follow the laws of earth. So this is how I depict that. In this paradigm, humans are following, and that which leads is above. So this is what we were just talking about, where farmers follow the changing seasons in planting and harvesting. Sailors, fishermen, the same way. They would adjust navigation according to high tide, low tide, or following what is happening in this world. And as I mentioned, you and I change clothing depending on temperature. We engage in our outdoor activities depending on the weather. A ball game can be rained out. We move indoors and continue different activities, etc. So humans follow the earth. What happens in this world has a big impact, big influence on what we do. Then, the next level. Earth follows the laws of heaven. So when we talk about temperature changes, well, part of it depends on day and night, because the sun provides us with warmth. It gets cooler at night. It can also be dependent, as we mentioned, on the season, the seasonal changes, which is dependent We know now in science, dependent on Earth's orbit around the sun, the tide depends on phases of the moon. So it's clear that the Earth follows the laws of heaven. Then, what about heaven itself? Heaven follows Tao. So we're talking about the movement of celestial bodies. And in science, we know that the movements of celestial bodies follow Newtonian orbital mechanics. That's one aspect of the Tao. Light that travels the universe, traversing light years, obey Einstein's relativity, part of the Tao. The expansion of the universe, we now know in science, follow natural laws, which incorporate aspects that are still being explored, like dark matter, dark energy. They have not yet been fully understood, and yet they are also part of the Tao. So it is also clear that heaven follows the laws of Tao. Then finally, we have Dao follows nature. Here, nature means existence or reality itself, which is only another name for the Tao. So this is basically saying the Tao follows itself recursively. That is why I had the symbol of infinity there to represent nature. The Tao follows itself because the Tao is complete and self-sufficient. You and I are reflections of that self-sufficiency. We will talk about that just a few slides away. Here, looking at this scheme, it is important to see, number one, each level follows the level above it. It is also important to see that every level reflects every other level. All of these different things reflect one another. These are the different aspects of existence, different aspects of reality. And finally, the Tao is the ultimate thing that unifies all the levels of existence. And now you can see how the scheme works. So I hope this has given you some insights into the mind of the ancient sages. This is how they thought about everything, the whole of existence. Now, there's a lot more to their thinking. It is truly deep and vast, the way they thought about the universe. Let's continue to explore. We want to look at the next couple of lines. As you can see here, line 7 and line 8, they say, the Tao of Heaven does not contend and yet excels in winning, does not speak and yet excels in responding. Let's talk about that. Let's cover line 7 first. Does not contend, so non-contention, excels in winning. Okay, let's talk about how that is compared to conventional thinking. In our world, as we deal with other people, we can oftentimes come across the idea that you must fight in order to win. This is very common. Now, the Tao paradigm is actually not that. The Tao paradigm is that the Tao does not fight, but always wins in the end. And why does the Tao not contend? Because it acts without attachments, without emotions, without ego. We human beings fight oftentimes because of emotions, because of attachments, because contention is ego-driven. So we act oftentimes from or based on attachments, the baser instincts, and a lot of times we will say, living in this world, we say, well, you can't win them all. Win some, lose some. More often than not, and perhaps more often than we like to admit, we lose more than we win. So what about the heavenly Tao? What about the sages that study the Tao and emulate the Tao? Well, the sages are non-contentious, and yet they too excel in winning. So in other words, they take on the characteristics of the Tao because they live in accordance with the Tao. And what the sages observe is that they look to the heaven, they see that, as we mentioned, the Tao moves heavenly bodies without emotions. That's another way to say the Tao embodies the Wu Wei principle, acting without attachments, allowing everything to follow nature, without friction, without contention, and in the long run, it is always victorious in the end. So Tao cultivators seek to do the same thing, following the sages, emulate the Tao, and learn from all of the above. Tao cultivators, which I hope is all of us, we recognize that we can let go of the ego-driven need to contend. We recognize that those who are contentious move against the Tao of harmony. They end up with defeat, loss, and disasters. So by learning from their example, we can decide to steer ourselves away from contention and attachments. We end up with the victory in a way just like the Tao, that is smooth and effortless. So that covers line 7. Let's go to line 8. Line 8 says, the Tao of Heaven does not speak and yet excels in responding. So now, just the same way, we want to highlight conventional thinking first. You must speak in order to respond. This is why a lot of times we say, speak up, go ahead, speak your mind, say your piece. Now, the Tao paradigm is not like that. The Tao does not speak, but reacts to everything. It's natural laws. You throw something up, it's got to come down. That's part of natural laws that are instantly responsive. Now, it doesn't talk. Natural laws do not speak. And that's the reason why we say the Tao is silent. As we looked at in the Jing, and also in previous studies of the Daodejing, the Tao moves everything, celestial bodies, you and me, human events, while saying absolutely nothing. The Tao is basically change. All changes it responds to, but in complete silence. So in looking at this, Tao sages follow a practice of talking less and acting more. That is, they respond with actions instead of words. Now, we all know that action speaks louder than words, and this is that same wisdom in the ancient Eastern setting, and we try to do the same thing ourselves. We seek to emulate and learn from the above. So basically, what we're saying is that everything reflects everything else. So reality can be seen, can be thought of as a mirror. And we want to be responsive because everything in this level, in these different levels of existence, everything is responsive. Everything reflects us. Which is why if you and I are lacking initiative or inactive, if we only engage in wishful thinking without taking any actions, well, the universe, the world reflecting us will also be inactive with respect to our thoughts. So, bottom line, we can express ourselves like the sages, like the Tao, by talking less and doing more. And what we do is reacted upon by other people, by the Tao itself. And as we will later see, by the heavenly Tao, the heavenly net that is in reaction to all of our actions. So this is the reason why there's much more of an emphasis on the practical applications of the Tao. That is, when we discuss the concept of prayer in the Tao, it's about aligning the mind in order to take actions and not waiting for some external party to come in and do something for you without you doing anything yourself. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that distinction. A lot of times the Tao paradigm is different from what we're used to, and sometimes the difference can be pretty subtle. And let's move on to the next line. Line 9 says, the Tao of Heaven is not summoned and yet comes on its own. So let's talk about that. So first of all, why is the Tao of Heaven not summoned? Because it is already present. It doesn't need to be told, come here. It is already here. It is not just here, but also there and everywhere else that we can contemplate, that we can imagine. So no need to pray to the Tao to be with us. It already is with us. So the idea is that we don't call for the Tao to come. We connect with the Tao that is already with us, already present. This makes sense in view of the last line. There's no need to say a prayer. We silently connect with the Tao. And we want to do the same thing ourselves. The Tao sages emulate this by being perceptive of others. They note that nature doesn't need to issue commands or give orders to anything or anyone. And yet, in nature, the changing of seasons, the transition of day and night, they all proceed smoothly without any problems. All living things, whether plants or animals, all follow nature on their own. And that is why we also want to do that same natural flowing practice of the Tao. We see that human beings who do not understand the Tao will often be the ones to go against this idea, this principle. They contrive to do things in a way that they think is clever, but they end up with poor results. And that is all because they have lost touch with the naturalness of the Tao. So in summary, the way that we react and respond to one another is that when people need assistance, they are already there. The Tao sages, the Tao cultivators are already present to provide assistance. And we seek to do the same thing by being as perceptive and as observant as the sages themselves. So that's the idea. Now let's cover the last of the 4 characteristics of the Tao, and that's line 10. As you can see here, line 10 says, is unhurried and yet excels in planning. Let's talk about that. So the Tao is never in a frantic rush, and yet everything gets done. Everything is perfectly coordinated. So this line confirms our interpretation of this entire chapter, because the Tao is all about not rushing into anything, but to plan things out beforehand. So if you look back on the first 2 lines of this chapter, the bold in daring will be killed. Well, it's opposed to the Tao. The bold in not daring will survive. It is in keeping with the Tao. So, like the Tao, we ourselves never rush into anything. Ideally, never rush into anything. And we plan things out exactly as it says. This is also, as I mentioned, about being bold without being reckless. And the bottom line is that all of us can be relaxed while making progress, attaining excellence, just by following the Tao. No need to rush. We see so many examples that indicates this is the way it ought to be. Creation itself is an example of this. Think about how living things evolve over millions of years into their present form, perfectly fitting into their unique ecological niche. The process of that evolution is unhurried, and yet we end up with the intricate functionalities for the living things to survive and thrive. We can keep this principle in mind. We can also, like nature, move at a pace that is not too fast, not too slow, always looking ahead, always planning things out. We can adopt this deliberate way of doing everything. The more difficult something is, the more careful we must be. So the idea is slow down in order to do it right. Back away in order to avoid errors. This applies to words as well as actions. So lastly, I want to just provide additional reinforcement about the importance of this concept. Here in this slide, you see the four characteristics together. Line 7, the Tao does not contend. The Tao excels in winning. Line 8, the Tao does not speak, but responds all the time. Line 9, the Tao doesn't need to be summoned. It's already here. And line 10, the Tao is unhurried and yet excels in planning. A couple of things to point out here. Number one, non-contention is first because it is important. And then you can look at the whole thing together, the four characteristics, and see that these are ultimately beneficial to you and me. If we understand how to follow the Tao, this benefits us. If we apply it in life, we benefit other people. The Tao is about providing benefits. So this is one of the most important concepts in the Daodejing. We can actually see the importance by looking at the very end of the Daodejing. The last chapter of the Daodejing is chapter 81. And chapter 81 ends this way. The Tao of Heaven benefits and does not harm. The Tao of Sages assists and does not contend. The Tao of Sages follows the Tao of Heaven. The Tao of Sages emulate the Tao of Heaven. So all the descriptions in this chapter can be summed up in the statement that the Tao is the principle that benefits all. This is the final summary, the one concept that wraps everything up that Lao Tzu expressed about the Tao in the Daodejing. So the Tao sages understand this. So that is the reason why they emulate the Tao. That is the reason why they provide assistance to everyone and contend against no one. In this way, they provide benefits that is similar to the beneficial effects of the Tao to all living things. As Tao cultivators, we too try to do the same thing. We assist other people, we promote harmony, we want to be a beneficial influence in everything that we do. So as you can see, in terms of meaning, looking at chapter 73 and 70 and chapter 81, there's a very close correspondence between these two chapters, tied together by the Tao of Heaven. Let's continue on with our discussion on the Tao of Heaven. What I would like to do is to summarize what we have now seen in this chapter with the four different characteristics. So first, the Tao of Heaven itself. I want to say that although we do not completely understand the Tao, we can learn from the ancient sages about the primary characteristics they have observed, which are the four below. So number one, the non-contention part. The Tao follows the laws of nature with no contention. It always prevails in the long run. It will be the only thing that remains after everything is gone. Our existence is transient. We're not going to last forever. At least our physical bodies will not last forever. But the Tao will be everlasting. And the non-contention part of it, this is why we need to emulate the Tao. Heaven does not fight humans, and yet humans revere heaven. Heaven does not contend against living things, but all living things obey heaven. When there's a rainstorm, we scatter, we seek shelter, because all things obey heaven. Look at the next one. This is the part that talks about the Tao is silent. All things arise from the Tao without a word being said. It speaks only through its actions, turning day into night, one season into the next. So the silent nature of the Tao is reflected in all of us. Think about how it is that we, you and I, we can do our best work when we are free from the noise of distraction. Why is that? That's the silent Tao within us. We can do our best thinking when all is quiet and we can hear our own thoughts. Why is that? That's the silent Tao within us. That silence of the Tao is the opposite of the many sights and sounds offered by the material world as distractions and temptations. So that points to the essential importance of the Tao in all of us. Let's take a look at the next one. The Tao, the heavenly Tao, is not summoned and yet comes on its own. The Tao is all around us and within us. It cannot be requested, cannot be rejected. It is simply there. It's just there. Our task is to be aware of it and connect with it. So we are already part of it, but lack of awareness weakens our connection to it. And when we are unaware, we cannot tap into the Tao, utilize its power for our benefit. We all have this ability to tap into the Tao at any time. Now, those who don't know the Tao can tap into this power by accident once in a while, and they may talk about how they get into a flow state or they are in the zone. So you hear this from athletes. When they do something particularly well for an extended period of time, they may come off of it and say that I was in the flow, I was in the zone. They've tapped into the Tao, even though they may not ever have heard of it before. If we understand it better, we can connect with it more consistently. Whenever we need to, we can put ourselves in that flow state, the state of excellence, the state of effortless excellence. Now let's talk about the last one. The last one is talking about the Tao being unhurried, but excels in planning. Everything in the universe happens at the right time, not a moment sooner or later. All living things, sourced in the Tao, reflect its intricate planning. Just look at us. Look at the way that we are constructed. We too are products of evolution. We ourselves reflect the Tao. So this reinforces the idea that everything in our lives happens at the right time. So when we're late, when we're early, there's always some sort of reason behind that. It's all part of our own Tao of existence. It's been about 30 years now since I started studying the Tao seriously. I had always had the linguistic ability to understand the Tao, but only from 30 years ago did I take it seriously and apply the teachings. I often think that if I started even earlier, I could have avoided a lot of pain and suffering from my own mistakes. But now that I understand what this chapter conveys, I see the reality is, in all likelihood, I needed to go through that particular school, the school of hard knocks. It prepared me to be ready for the Tao. In that sense, everything happens at the right time. Now, I want to follow that thought and apply these 4 attributes, 4 characteristics to your life and mine. First, when we look at the heavenly Tao, we observe circles. The circular nature of the Tao is reflected in human interactions. All actions, good or bad, will circle back to us. So this is getting us closer to the karma concept, the heavenly net that we touched on previously. So let's talk about the non-contention. Well, you cannot contend against the Tao of karmic effects. It is invisible and formless. So there's nothing to fight. It will always prevail in the end. We'll get into this in greater depth when we talk about the heavenly net. And then the Tao is a law of balance, not a person who speaks. You cannot engage the Tao in a debate. You cannot persuade it to do what you want it to do. It responds only to your actions. And the law of balance means that in the long run, everything balances out. That is a recurring idea within the karmic rules that are part of the Tao. And then the third characteristic, not summoned. The Tao of cause and effect is always present. There's no need to request its presence, nor is there any way to hide from it. You cannot avoid causing some kind of effect with your actions and words. That being the case, you may as well make sure that your actions and words will produce a good positive effect for yourself and for others. Lastly, the Tao of Heaven is never hurried. It is not in a hurry. It can take its time. Karmic consequences may not happen right away, but they will happen sooner or later. So this is what we will reinforce in the very next major concept, the heavenly net. The heavenly net is Tian Wang. 2 characters. Tian means heaven or sky. Wang means net. Can't be translated any other way. This is one of those characters that can only be translated one way. This is it. So heaven net, sky net. Translation, heavenly net. And as we just talked about, this is a term for describing the Tao of cause and effect. Good cause, good effect. Bad cause, negative effects. To be caught in this net means you cannot escape the consequences that you create. And the metaphor, the visual metaphor, is the fish caught in a net. It is another way to say that karmic debts must eventually be repaid. If not now, then some other time, but it must be repaid, no matter what. And this governs all of existence. Now, let's talk about the vastness of Tian Wang, the heavenly net. It is described with repeating characters, Hui. It's repeated twice for emphasis. One iteration of Hui is vast. 2 iterations means truly vast. And it is vast because the conception of the heavenly net is that it extends across everything and everyone. All actions and words, plus the effects they generate, are within the heavenly net. There's nowhere you can go to be outside of it. And this is why we say, everyone, you and I, we must own up to the consequences that we create ourselves. The heavenly net cannot be seen. It is invisible, but it's there all the same. As we mentioned, it does not fight anyone, does not contend against anything that's caught up in it. It's just there. You can't accomplish anything if you struggle against the net. It says nothing, but it responds to every move you make. When you struggle against it, it simply expands or shrinks accordingly. Now, it's always there, as we talked about. It doesn't get dismissed. It doesn't go away. It is present as long as you exist. So rather than to imagine heavenly nets as a person you can talk to, it's better to stick to the metaphor presented here, like an invisible formless matrix. And you can make use of this understanding by working with that metaphor. Slow down and think about what is happening in your life right now. What are some of the actions, some of the consequences that you are seeing right now? What is something that happened recently that you can then attribute to the heavenly net action, reaction, responding to your every move? Then let's talk about the very last line of this chapter. Line 12, loose and yet does not let anything slip through. And now I think that we have seen the heavenly nets and the Tao of Heaven are different ways to talk about the same thing. Let's link the concepts together. So the heavenly net is loose. This is the reason why some people may not even realize that it is present. That is, some people may think that they can take actions without necessarily suffering the consequences that they generate. That lack of awareness is what leads to thoughtless actions. This ties back into the beginning of this chapter, where basically we're talking about how the unwise will charge into danger. Being thoughtless, having that lack of awareness, the unwise is caught in the net and killed. So think back to the metaphor of fish caught in the net. The wise proceed cautiously to avoid negative consequences that the net can generate and survives. Sooner or later, one way or another, the heavenly net responds. This line tells us nothing slips through. So we may as well figure out how to make use of it by further understanding. And this is the reason why the next few slides, in my opinion, are the most important slides that we can talk about. They tie into metaphysical concepts, and more importantly, they will illustrate the thinking steps of the sages. So let's start with the heavenly net itself, and then work our way to all of the implications of it. So the heavenly net, represented here by a spider web, a net in nature, but think of it as something that we cannot really see. It is infinitely vast, and when I say vast, I mean vast across space-time, all of space-time, across all of space, across all time. So infinitely extending in all directions in terms of physical dimensions, geography, as well as time, as well as chronology. So with space, the heavenly net is with you when you are all by yourself, when you don't think that anyone is going to know what you're doing. It is with you when you interact with anyone. That interaction among people are just as subject to the heavenly net, the cause and effect. It is omnipresent regardless of location. So this is why we oftentimes see this in drama, movies, television, novels, shows. Think about someone who runs away from guilt, tries to start a new life in a new place, only to have the past catch up with him. Have you seen that movie? I have, many times. Have you read that novel? I have, many times. It is represented in our stories, the stories we tell one another, and movies and novels are just another form of storytelling. It is represented that way because it's a recurring theme. It's a pattern that repeats itself over and over again. And it is all because you cannot outrun your conscience, no matter where you go. And the consciousness of the universe is also something that is always observing. Therefore, there's no outrunning karma either. No place is exempt. No place is beyond the reach of the heavenly net. Now, that I think is easier to see because, as I mentioned, because all the stories that we've been exposed to illustrate this very principle about the heavenly net stretching across all space. No place to run. Now, the second one across all time is going to be tricky, is going to be something that we in the Western thinking paradigm may not be used to. Okay, so this can be more challenging. Across all time starts out easy. The heavenly nets can take effect right away. This is what we call instant karma in modern times. In fact, if one were to do a search of instant karma on the internet, one sees all kinds of examples of instant karma. So that's the heavenly nets acting immediately. Now, the next few parts get trickier and trickier. The next one is okay. It can take effect within a lifetime, like the negative consequences that you generate can catch up with you the next day, next week, next month, next year. But then, not always. It can seem as if you have escaped the consequences of your actions, as if you have somehow slipped through the heavenly net. Well, the sages are going to say it can take effect across multiple lifetimes. And I know already when we talk about multiple lifetimes, there's already going to be people who say that, well, I'm not sure that I, as of yet, subscribe to the concept of reincarnation. I don't know about that. I'm uncertain. I just don't know. I am going to illustrate exactly why the ancient sages reached that particular conclusion, and you're going to see that it makes a lot of sense. Here's the bottom line. On a long enough time scale, everything balances out. Something is out of balance temporarily when, for instance, something awful has been done, and yet there's no justice being done to correct it. Everything is out of balance. But if we wait a little bit longer, we oftentimes will see that everything balances out. The time scale of karma, of the heavenly net, not a human time scale. Therefore, it can be far longer than we think is quote unquote right from human judgment. But it's still going to happen. It's still going to balance out eventually. Now, let me talk about why this is true, starting with a concept we covered before about self-nature, 自性. This is a slide that I showed you previously about the enlightenment, the awakening, the realization of the sixth patriarch, Huimen, He was the sixth patriarch of the Zen Buddhism tradition. And when he became enlightened, he was surprised and shocked about the nature of you and me in the deepest part of our being, the self-nature part. And so he exclaimed the 5 things that surprised him about self-nature. I am going to focus on just 2 of them for our explanation. The first one, how unexpected that self-nature is originally not born or extinguished. This is going to tie in to our discussion on you and me and everyone being immortal spiritual entities. An immortal spiritual entity is neither created nor can it be extinguished. And it happens to be a description of the Tao itself and a description of the Tao in you and me that is inextricably part of us. So we'll talk about that. Then the other part that I want to focus on is how unexpected that self-nature originally is not moved or shaken. This specifically means the self-nature is eternally constant. Eternally constant, therefore not moved or shaken, meaning constant and changeless. You, I'm talking about you, the individual point of consciousness that is you, will never stop being you, no matter how the world or existence or reality itself changes. So these are the 2 most important things that tie in to the next part. And it's about the eternal self-nature going through multiple lifetimes. So let me first start out by covering Eastern and Western paradigms. In the West, we're used to the traditional view we've seen, whether we believe or not, we've seen the idea that the soul, the human soul, lives this life in this world, and then the soul goes on to heaven or hell eternally. So the existence is eternal, yes. So in the West, we also talk about the immortality of the soul, no problem there. But the concept, the Eastern concept of self-nature is different. So the Eastern concept is that the self-nature refines itself lifetime after lifetime. So these are the 2 different concepts. You can see that most people are more familiar with the former than the latter. And today is going to be all about the latter and the reasoning that leads up to it. In the Tao, this is an important term, Dao Li. Dao Li is a term not just in the Tao, but also in everyday spoken communication, modern Mandarin as well as ancient Chinese. 2 characters, Dao, you already know that character. It means the way, it means the path. It's the root. Li means reasoning, rationality. Dao Li together means that there's a reason, there's a rational explanation, there's a reasoning process for believing what you believe. So this is not something that requires that you take anything on faith. You just have to work through the reasoning process to see why it makes sense. And this is going to tie into ideas like how likely is something to be true. We know that we can never be absolutely certain of everything, but within the uncertainties of the world, the ancient sages have figured out what we can be reasonably sure about. There's the Dao Li. What is reasonable? What is the rational explanation? So let's go through the steps. First, you and I know we are conscious beings. How do you know that? You just know that. If we were to ask this question, how do we know we're conscious beings? What is the answer? The answer is, by asking this very question, by reflecting on this question, it is only a conscious being that is capable of doing that. As I'm asking this question to you right now and you're thinking about it, the reason why you can think about it and wonder about it at all is the telltale sign that you are a conscious being. Now, we have all seen programmatic chess players. This could be like a computer software, like a chess game. We play against the computer. The computer, the chess player, it can be very good. It's got a very strong algorithm for playing chess. People used to think that a game like chess would only be reserved for human intellect. Now we see that artificial intelligence can outdo human intellect at playing chess. But as far as right now, that chess playing algorithm cannot contemplate questions about its own actions. Why am I playing chess? Is this the best use of my time? What is the meaning of playing chess? What am I trying to accomplish? Who indeed am I? What indeed am I? The self-reflective questions are the sole province of a conscious entity. This is the reason why I showed you that diagram about the different levels of existence and how the Tao is reflected among all the different levels. By being able to reflect a mental activity, that is the absolute proof of you being a conscious entity. And as conscious entities, we know that we are more than just our physical bodies. I think everybody knows this, but let's talk about that. Let's take a look to see how we already know that no matter how we age, no matter how the body changes, we're still us. You're still you, no matter how your body changes. You can be sick, you can become healthier, you can become more fit, you can kind of let yourself go physically. No matter how your body changes, you're still you. The consciousness that is you is existing independent of the physical body. The Tao sages will actually push that even further, push the envelope to the edge to say that the true self is also beyond the mind. Because a lot of times in the West, we think of the mind as the real self. My mind, that's me, my memories that make up who I am. The ancient sages will say, no. Who you are is beyond your mind, your memories. Because just like how your body can change, but you're still you, you can change your mind about anything and still be you. So your mind is not you, you are what is using your mind. Memories, your memories, they don't make up who you are. You can forget things. And indeed, we forget things all the time. We can lose memories. It doesn't matter what you lose. You're still you. This is why the sages teach the true self is beyond the mind. This is part of the Dao Li, rational steps, reasoning process. And indeed, in Zen Buddhism, it's an important topic to separate out your true self, the self nature, and other aspects of you. So the term, a specific term to Zen Buddhism is the original face. There's a cone. What did your face look like before your parents were born? This takes a variety of different forms. Sometimes it is given as, what did you look like before you were born? But it can extend to parents. The whole point is, you got to start thinking about yourself as other than what you normally associate with yourself, the body, the mind, memories, etc. So this is why what you're looking at here at the bottom, this is why the concept of self-nature is not exactly like the soul. It's roughly equivalent, but not exactly the same. Okay? So it's all about consciousness. And part of this is something that you can feel intuitively, like, well, I know I'm a conscious being. I just know that. And now the sages are pushing it to its ultimate expression. Please note, science does not yet fully understand consciousness, but there are some things that we can do to already figure out stuff for ourselves. Let's continue this process. We're continuing with Daoli, that which is rational, reasonable, sensible, the reasoning process. So you, the true self, the self nature that we're talking about, this remains you no matter what is changed about yourself. We talked about the body, the mind, the memories, etc. And there's more. There's identity, there's name. You can change your name, you're still you. You can change everything about you, where you live, what you wear, doesn't matter. You're still you. None of that is your true self. And this you is also, this concept of you here is something that we can all accept. Even the people, like people in my life who are atheists or agnostic, they may reject the concept of the soul. Like they don't know, they believe that the soul exists. You can disbelieve the existence of the soul, but you have to admit that there is that ineffable you that remains you no matter what. That's step one. Okay, let's go to step two. This you is inextricably linked to the Tao. This is in the West, we talk about God is in you. In the East, we'll say, in Eastern expressions, we may say the Tao is, you are part of the Tao is part of you. And we also say we are linked to one another. At a fundamental level, we are all connected to one another. Well, how is that? So let's talk about the Tao being constant and your true self being constant. A lot of times, we talk a lot about this, the connection between the self and the Tao. This is how we make it real. First of all, the nature of the Tao is change. Let's talk about change for just a moment. The very first book about the Tao is Jing, the book of changes. We have expressions in the West. We say the only thing that doesn't change is change itself. Or we say it in a different way, like change is the eternal constant. Same thing. The only thing that doesn't change is change, because everything's going to change, but the principle of change remains constant. Now, what I want you to do mentally is to draw a straight line connecting you and the Tao, connecting the Tao and change, connecting you and the principle of change. You are change. You cause change. The consciousness that is you is the constant Tao, the eternal Tao, and the eternal principle of change. The you, that is your consciousness, it will never change regardless of all other changes. Next, this you is the only thing that carries over from one lifetime to the next. This is an extension of number two. If you're the one thing that is eternally constant, then you are the only thing that's carrying over from one lifetime to the next. Now here you may say that, well, I haven't really accepted this whole idea of multiple lifetimes yet. That's coming. You are no exception to the cycles of existence. Okay, what are we talking about here? Well, you and I, we can observe nature just as the ancient sages do, and we can see cycles everywhere. We see the heavenly cycles, we see seasonal cycles. In ourselves, we see Day and night, we go through the sleep cycle every day. We're familiar with that. So cycles, circular nature of the world, of nature itself, is visible and evident in every direction. Everywhere we look, it's there. So now, let's talk about life and death. No one has absolute certainty about life and death. But what I'll say is that it is far more likely that life and death is the cycles metaphor, the cycles paradigm, just like everything else. The cycles of existence applies to life and death as well. If it doesn't, that would make life and death the only exception to everything that we can see, everything. Why would it be the only exception? And what are the reasons for that exception? How likely is that? The sages look at it and the sages will say, well, it's far more likely that we are all partaking in the cycles of existence ourselves. That's why. Daoli, it must make sense. It has to make sense. It guarantees that it makes sense. Next, this you is the consciousness that learns and perfects itself. Again, this is from observation. We look in nature, we see that nothing is wasted in nature, absolutely nothing. The ancient sages could see this when they observed how animal waste and remains nourish plants, and the plants in turn nourish animals. Nothing goes to waste. The more we learn about science, the more we see this is true. In modern times, we understand how nature wastes absolutely nothing at the molecular or atomic levels. What we burn by fire isn't obliterated, but transformed. Water evaporates into the sky, form clouds, and there's precipitation as rain. Nothing is wasted. The water is not wasted. So what about us? Think about what happens when you go through life. You learn lessons along the way. You incorporate the knowledge of these lessons into wisdom. When you apply the knowledge that you have learned into everyday life, they transform into wisdom, which you can integrate into your being, your essence. Then the wisdom becomes part of you. You've become a better version of yourself, a wiser version of yourself. Nothing is wasted. If at the end of this life, all of that goes to nothing, there's simply a discontinuation, a full stop, then all of that is wasted. All of that will be the only exception that violates everything, literally violates everything we see all around us. Therefore, ancient sages reason, Daoli, it is far more reasonable, far more likely to assume that indeed nothing is wasted. We carry the wisdom with us, and we are no exception to the cycles of existence. We continue on to further refine ourselves with the next set of lessons. This slide that you're looking at here, this is the one slide that lays out the compelling reasons why you are eternal. And death is not the end, because it never ends. So take a look at this. The way everything works in existence, reality itself guarantees that what you do here and now is of the utmost importance. This is why you and I are together in this talk. So now we're at the top of the hour. It's time for us to go to the summary. Let's take a look at the summary, the takeaways from chapter 73, part 1 and 2. Part 1 from last time was about the duality, the complementary duality of courage but reckless, or courage plus thoughtfulness. And therefore, in applying that teaching, we want to, number one, know exactly what we're getting into. We want to observe. We want to see what's going on before formulating a plan of action, never rushing forward blindly. Number two, we want to choose the right time and place to act. We want to plan things out. And it's a guarantee that if you follow the Tao, the perfect moment to act for best effect, it will happen when you are ready. That's from last time. That's from the previous discussion in the first part of 73. Now, let's talk about the Tao of Heaven, which is the focus today. Let's take a look at the things that we must do in following that. Number one, we must refrain from contention with anyone. As much as possible, we must do this because the harmonious are the ones who excel in winning. Number two, we want to be responsive with fewer words. Too many words, wasted breath. Actions will speak for you with far greater effectiveness than your words. So put the emphasis on actions rather than many words. Number three, be present with mindful awareness. Be here now. What are we doing? What are we talking about? What does it mean? No need to wait for summons, no need to wait for invitation. You are here right now. Number four, refrain from rushing into things. This goes back to the both in daring and not daring, in that we want to plan things out thoughtfully and then follow the plan. So this is talked about in both the beginning and toward the end of chapter 73. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.